Hello and welcome to the 6th digital session of the DW Global Media Forum 2020. I'm Rachel Stewart, and today we will discuss the importance of influencers in society, especially in democratic processes. For many people, the word influencer conjures up images of beauty, fashion, or fitness Instagrammers. These people have managed to carve out a niche for themselves online, using video content, podcasts, and more to talk about their area of expertise, and some are even making very good money from it. But as public discourse shifts away from traditional media platforms and more towards social media and individuals, we've also seen influencers emerge in areas such as politics, human rights, and environmental campaigning. These people often reach millions around the world online, giving them a certain degree of credibility and certainly the power to steer the debate. In many cases, they've become the go-to source of news for their followers. And the fact that in some countries, influencers are experiencing repression from governments or other political agents shows that their influence is not being underestimated by those in traditional seats of power. So what does all this mean for democracy, and what challenges does it present for journalism and news consumers?
The power of influencers and what they mean for democracy. Welcome to the 6th online session of the Global Media Forum. From fashion to fitness and even beauty tips, influencers have enormous reach. They also have a lot of credibility among their followers. Now, they're increasingly voicing their opinions about political issues. They've garnered support in the current public discourses, especially from young people. A new dynamic is emerging. Reactions from politicians range from ignorance to repression. What does this mean for democracy? Can influencers contribute to creating more pluralism in autocratic states? And what challenges does this pose to journalists? Join our discussion.
Now, let me introduce you to our guests today from around the world. Masih Alinejad is a journalist, author, and women's rights campaigner from Iran. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we have Hussein Baoumi, an Egypt and Libya researcher at Amnesty International. Glad you could join us.
Thank you so much.
And JJ Amojua is the founder and chief strategist at the Alpha Research, one of Nigeria's foremost digital media companies. Welcome. A very warm welcome to you all, and thank you for joining us. So, Masih, I'd like to kick things off with you. You're a journalist and had to flee Iran more than 10 years ago for your critical reporting. Since then, you've gained a huge following online with more than 200,000 followers on Twitter alone. And now you're known internationally as a political influencer. So seeing as you've had both experiences, the traditional journalism side, but also becoming an influential online figure, how would you say that social media has freed you from censorship or allowed you to do things that you couldn't have done with traditional news reporting?
That's a very good question to start, because I want to actually give you a better picture of what journalism means in Iran and in the Middle East, not only in Iran. You have the traditional media, and you have to follow the rule that the government actually give you. There are some red lines and censorship, of course, for the traditional media. But still, we are suffering from self-censorship as well. In the Middle East, especially in Iran, women are not even being censored through the government. There are some norms and some social pressure actually force you to do self-censorship. And that is why I strongly believe that social media became like a weapon, as I use it like a hashtag, my camera is my weapon. Social media is like a weapon when you face weapon in your daily life. I'm just gonna give you an example. I was a journalist in parliament, Iranian parliament, for years. So I got kicked out by the MPs just because I exposed the corruption. So that time I was a journalist working for traditional media. And when they kicked me out, I thought I'm done, because I couldn't do anything more. But on social media right now, when you get kicked out from everywhere, like me, I got kicked out from my homeland, from my beautiful country. But I have a social media, I have Instagram, with 4 million followers right now, and I have Twitter with 200 and Facebook with 1 million followers. So that means I don't need the traditional media in Iran. That means they kicked me out from Iran, but I am there every day through my social media. So another example is women inside Iran. When women are getting beaten up by morality police, when women are getting kicked out from stadium, entering the sports stadium, women are banned to enter stadium. Right, and all the traditional media, they are told that they cannot write about compulsory hijab, they cannot write about some kind of red lines. But through social media, women are filming, using their camera and filming the harassers, filming the morality police, and it's everywhere. Like,
so,
it just...
So you've seen a good example of how social media can actually be a really powerful tool. But there must be some kind of danger associated with being in the public eye. It must have other consequences sometimes. We've seen cases where influencers who weren't even engaging in specific activism have still been targeted by perhaps governments and made an example of in a way.
I was going actually to mention that, yeah, it's dangerous for Iranian people. So what I do, I created a campaign called White Wednesdays and hashtag my camera is my weapon. So instead of people uploading that, in Iran, it's going to be very dangerous and it's risky for them. So people send the video to me. When I posted on my Instagram, it got like 9 million views. It reached 12 million people. And that had more influence. Why? Because it's under an umbrella. They are safe. And I can actually echo that on international media. And that is why the government are really scared. And they went after my family and they actually, arrested my brother to shut down the campaign. They're not scared of me. They're scared of this social media campaign because I give a platform and voice to those voiceless people inside Iran. Like about execution right now, this is the same. People might be scared, but on my social media, other influencers, people can echo their voices.
Hossein, I'd like to bring you in here as well. Have you also seen examples in your work of influencers who've been specifically targeted by authorities and people in power? And if so, why exactly is that happening?
Yeah, of course, this is a very common issue in Egypt at the moment. What happened in Egypt is that the authorities, they have been closing down a very successfully traditional independent media, either by simply arresting journalists or closing down critical or independent media, or simply buying them up through, allied businessmen and so on. So in Egypt today, there remains very few independent media outlets. Almost all of them are online, and even those, they have been subjected to harassment and they are censored in Egypt. So Egyptians, they cannot easily access them without some technical knowledge or having to rely on social media. So this has left only influencers or social media as a way for people to express critical or opinions that are not approved, quote unquote, by the state. And what we have been seeing is that the Egyptian authorities, they have been very much aware of that. So in 2018, they passed 2 laws, one on cyber crimes, which they have been using to prosecute people who tweet. In a very recent case, they sentenced a human rights defender to 15 years in prison solely based on tweets. They have been rounding up people who are tweeting or sharing on social media, subjecting them to enforced disappearances, accusing them of terrorism and detaining them without trials for years. And also in 2018, they have passed a law that considered any account, any social media account with more than 5,000 followers as an equivalent for media channels. So this is how the authorities see these accounts. And also we have seen a backlash from more conservative elements in the society, where they have responded to a recent very powerful wave against sexual assault and harassment and rape through either adopting a very reactionary message. So we have seen people on the right, very conservative preachers, for example, who defend rapists, who defend sexual assault, and instead accuse women and victims of sexual assault, or accuse members of the LGBTI community of being the reason for them being subjected to what have happened to them.
And how do the activists themselves actually react? I mean, if they're being targeted for what they're saying, is there any way that they can continue to have a voice online but also protect themselves?
Yeah, so we have seen actually a very interesting development in Egypt when it comes to influencers. So thinking of influencers, one would think of an individual that's very well known, talking about issues and then moving to talk about political issues. But because of how dangerous has become in Egypt, and because the government's very strong reaction through its own media, but also through lots of supporters that have aimed to delegitimize influencers that are not based inside Egypt. Also what influencers in Egypt have been doing is creating accounts that do not have a face. So, for example, something called Assault Police or Gang Rapists of Cairo, which have then taken on issues that, if they have taken them on as individuals, would have put them in danger. But has allowed them some space to address issues that the government wouldn't normally be okay with. But even then, the authorities have tried to identify some of the people behind these accounts, and they have arrested some of the people that may be connected to these accounts. Likewise, people who are aggressors or connected to rapists, they have also attempted to delegitimize these accounts, the people behind them, by adopting the same messaging that they are supporting debauchery, they are supporting immoral conduct. And also we have seen how the authorities have been using the issue of debauchery to target women influencers, even who don't talk about politics at all, but women on TikTok who have been, like dancing or whatever, just being there on social media. The authorities have been targeting them, whether by their own device or also with push from the society to arrest them for, again, quote unquote, immoral acts or debauchery or undermining Egyptian society morals.
Well, we're talking about the reaction then of the governments to the influencers. In your opinion, are the governments actually more likely to bow down to pressure from an online outcry, for example, rather than pressure from traditional governments or watchdogs or traditional diplomacy?
So it's a mix of both. I mean, on the one hand, online pressure, it's de facto the only way, one of the very few ways that remains. There are some protests that do take place, but they are extremely dangerous for the people who participate in them. So online media or online activity, it does retain lots of or some power to change the behavior of the government on some issues, particularly the issues that are not considered vital to the survival of the government in power now. So, for example, we have seen how the authorities have bowed down to pressure when it comes to issues like women's rights and bullying to some extent. But at the end of the day, some issues that the government and security forces consider very vital to the survival of the government, they would respond. They would not really be susceptible to pressure from online sources, but the main source of pressure remains to be international pressure, particularly through Egyptian allies in the US and in the EU. And here we are talking about arbitrary detention, forced disappearances, torture, and so on.
JJ, I'd like to cross over to you now. You've written and spoken a lot on the topic of digital literacy and online access. So how valuable are digital platforms in terms of strengthening democracy, particularly on the African continent?
Thank you very much, Rachel. I think they are extremely valuable, especially when you consider the cost of accessing traditional media platforms like TV or writing to a newspaper. So they are extremely valuable, especially when you also look at the kind of impact they've made across the continent over the last decade. And even if you don't talk about the Arab Spring, there's been movements in Senegal, in Gambia, in Togo, in Nigeria, in Cameroon, in Angola, in South Africa, in Zimbabwe, all over the continent. You've seen young people, by virtue of being able to access social media platforms, actually have their voice heard by their government. Sometimes they've made change happen, sometimes they haven't, but their voices definitely have been heard. Of course, there's still issues with affordability, there's still issues with access, but without a question, the democratization of activism and advocacy as it has happened in Africa over the last 10 years, thereabout, has been extraordinary, especially when you consider, like the other panelists suggested the impacts and ability of government to control the traditional media space, whether through laws or actually ownership. So the essence of social media platforms for advocacy and activism and for democracy generally in Africa cannot be overemphasized.
And you yourself have close to 1 million Twitter followers, and you're also active on Instagram and other platforms. So how exactly did you end up gaining such a large online presence? And does this come with a sense of responsibility to the people who are following you?
It does. It certainly does. When I started, I was just a young person, just voicing my opinion according to how I felt, according to anything. It just was. There was not much. There was thinking involved, but I didn't really consider that I had some power. It was just me being myself. Now I consider things very much. I am very responsible for what I put out, and also the consequences are bigger for me now because of my profile. How did I build the following? I think it comes across in terms of how I've been able to have conversations, whether it's political, whether it's sporting, whether it is pop culture. I've been fortunate enough to be able to hold conversations across different areas of life, politics, social, cultural, that affect the people. And especially when I started out, it wasn't done in the way that I was doing it. A lot of people feared for me. They thought I was risking my life. And I thought that by so doing, many people would realize that we actually are free people. And the fact that we've been used to being oppressed and our voices being suppressed should not make us get used to that normal. Because the fact that we're used to it doesn't mean that it should be the normal. So having been able to be the barrier and be able to actually use these platforms to fearlessly and courageously challenge the system, I can proudly say that now that's become the norm. A lot of people are actually have their voices heard now. So that's no longer as refreshing as it was when I started out. But I would think that being able to do that then was one of the major reasons why my followership grew. And yes, I'm very, very conscious of, and I'm very, very, I try as much as possible. These days, I sort of operate almost like a conventional media platform in terms of making sure to confirm what I'm putting out and making sure to, see the impact and the unintended and intended consequences that it might have on different strata of society and people.
Well, we've actually got a question come in already from one of our viewers. This is a question for Masi and JJ, and it's from Kamal in Turkey. The question is, who were the people you first followed when you joined Twitter or other social media platforms, and why?
Oh my God, that's a very difficult question, because I remember when I created my Facebook account, I was in Iran, and I just followed the people from my village, because I was shocked that I see some people even in my village, they entered Facebook. So I wanted to, because I was in Tehran. So basically I followed the officials for sure and journalists, but those people that I wanted to know what they do were those people from my own village, because I wanted to know if the media goes to the hand of ordinary people, what they want to say, how they want to express themselves. And to be honest, right now, actually on my Instagram, if you go and check, of course I follow the officials, but mostly I follow ordinary people, because this is where you can challenge the government. As a journalist and activist, as an influencer, you know what people really want. You see their daily life and you see the daily lives of the officials, then you know what to do. You get to know the language of ordinary people. So for me, it's very important actually to follow like students from different universities, different towns, workers, teachers, nurses, like women. That's all, because this is actually the power of the social media. People can bring democracy by knowing what their rights is and how to express themselves through social media. They receive a lot of, the social media influencers receive a lot of death threats. I myself being bullied online, and the government actually made a huge campaign saying that I have to be kidnapped, even in America. But when you give the power to ordinary people, then they might hack you, they might arrest you as an influencer, they might kidnap you, they might, I don't know, they can find a way to shut you down. But when you find ordinary people and you're in touch with them every day, then every individual person, you can make them as an influencer. They cannot go after every single person and arrest them. So that's my opinion. That's why I follow them and I help them and I try to empower them.
Is that the same case for you, JJ? It's more about ordinary people rather than other influencers or perhaps politicians?
I started out following news platforms. And when I started, the government officials had not been on the internet. But these days, I follow people according to what I'm interested in, and also people that I find very, very refreshing. I also try my best to follow people from across the African continent just to get an idea of what is happening, especially the countries that influence the perception of Africa in the global conversation of politics or the economy. So I started out following regularly conventional media platforms, the big ones like DW, of course, the BBCs and the CNNs. Eventually, of course, I also had to follow my friends that I knew. Eventually, it was about following people to know what's happening on the streets, following, again, journalists all over the world, following people from across the continent, and then following protests wherever they're happening all over the world and the people leading those protests, just to learn one or two things.
I'd just like to mention for anyone following us at home right now that, of course, you can write to us during this session with any questions you've got for any of our panellists and any comments, of course. So we've got viewers watching all around the world today, and yeah, we're looking forward to getting some more input for the debate today. So if you're just tuning in, this is the 6th session of the Global Media Forum 2020 digital session. Thank you for joining us. And we've got a great panel today discussing influencers and how influencers can affect democracy around the world. So I'll come back to Masih for the next question. Perhaps you could tell us a little bit about your hashtag campaign. You have kind of seen how a hashtag can bring people together online, but also be a good tool for mobilizing people on the ground. Could you tell us a little bit about your campaign and how it worked?
Look, I think hashtag, it's like an umbrella. For me, I was not the person who started the campaign against forced hijab in Iran, but I can say that hashtag and social media helped me to gather all people who were individually protesting against hijab, but they didn't have any platform to be heard. So I remember the first time when I created the hashtag White Wednesdays, I really didn't expect that I'm going to be bombarded by women and men inside Iran sending me videos and saying that we wanted to express ourselves, but we didn't know how to do it. So because it was dangerous for them. So they sent the videos to me so this is the way that they can bypass the authority. They can actually avoid the arrest inside Iran. So I received in one night of White Wednesday, I received 90 videos and photos. And then when I published that, of course, as you say, the government were really, they got very scared. So they found a way to oppress them. First, they arrested women's rights activists who joined White Wednesdays. And they thought this is the way that they can shut down the movement. But what happened, which I got even shocked, after women got arrested, other women who believed in hijab joined me and send me videos and using the hashtag, even uploading the videos themselves. So you see, this is actually the reality in Iran, that the government tried to mobilize, to find the activists through online activity and arrest them. But they don't know that if they do this, they're helping us to spread our message more. Because, for instance, I'm going to give you another example. For years and years, it was women chasing it was the morality police chasing women. And there were a lot of videos on YouTube that women were screaming and police were chasing them, getting arrested, beating up the women in the streets. But right now, when you go on, check the hashtag, my camera is my weapon, it's opposite. It's the other side. It's the other way.
this time women are chasing morality police. Why? Because, for instance, when I received a video of a woman like screaming and saying that this is my body and my choice, this is my right, you don't dare to tell me what to wear. And the guy was like saying, yeah, but you have to follow the law. The woman said, slavery used to be legal. Slavery used to be the law as well. And that message went viral. Like million and million people watched it. It went on their mainstream media as well. So other people joined her by using the same hashtag. So that's why I think that the government can shut down the official media and newspaper inside Iran. They can arrest individuals because of making viral videos, but they cannot silence the message. They cannot arrest the message. You know what I mean? They cannot arrest the hashtag. The hashtag is there. And in my opinion, courage is it's something that can be spread. So for this reason, another example is that there is a hashtag called Stop Execution in Iran. 12 million people use this hashtag. Of course, the government executed Navid Afkari, one of the wrestlers right now. And there are more other protesters are on their death row. Right now, when people are broken, when they saw Navid Afkari was executed, they started to take the attention of other leaders of the world, like the leaders of European government, the leaders of the United States. So the government have been executed its own opponents for 40 years. But this is the hashtag. This is the social media. This is the media influencers can actually put a light on it and get the attention of the rest of the world that this is what's going on in Iran. So for me,
that's a really good example. That's a really good example of how the internet is being used as a powerful tool, bringing people together, encouraging civic engagement even. But would you also say that if particular individuals end up gaining such a large presence online, is there any danger of those people almost monopolizing the debate and thus actually reducing the number of voices that are heard?
Actually, that's very scary, which I was going to tell you that in dictatorship regime, the government actually using that, making fake celebrities, making fake social account, or even going after social media influencers in Iran. They went after some of those who had like almost 1 million followers or 2 million followers. The government went after them, arrested them, and made them to do false confession on TV. They made an apology online. And now the government trying to manipulate the news through them, using them and spreading fake news through them. They became a mouthpiece of the government. So this is the tactic that the regime actually used. In dictatorship regime, you have some celebrities actually echoing and repeating the message which the government actually gave it to them. Some of them are known now, but some of them you don't know that they are actually doing what the government asked them to do, and because they're using very smart way to manipulate the dialect, the news. But in my country, Iran, a lot of media, a lot of newspaper did an investigative report about those influencers. For instance, about hijab. Some of them who has like millions of followers, they were all uploading videos unveiled, but suddenly they changed their appearance. They like actually uploaded video with hijab and saying that, so we regret. But you know the narrative, you know the language, the term that they're using, they're all the same. And that is how the government tried to use the social media against its own people.
We've actually got some more questions from our users that we'd love to share. This has got a question for all of our panellists, so hopefully we can get to everybody. It's a question from Ahmed in Egypt, and he's asking, how can influencers and bloggers advance or strengthen freedom of expression on social media platforms? How can influencers be involved in progressive democratic movements online? So perhaps if we could go to JJ first.
I think first of all is to be conscious of what I would call popularity bias as an influencer, which is that the fact that you have a very, very busy, very, very popular platform, people are likely to believe you. And it means that you owe it to yourself to be very, very responsible. The second thing is to understand that you must seek out other powerful voices that are not necessarily popular, that are not necessarily with 500,000 or 1 million followers, and try to amplify their voices. And you must learn when to take the back seats and let other people speak. And I think that's very, very important. If we want to have pluralism takes place on social media, because it's supposed to be, but what we now have is echo chambers. So again, we must also be very conscious to give voices to people that we don't necessarily agree with, to amplify them. These days, the truth is defined by the number of tweets, the number of likes, the number of shares, and unfortunately, that's also how fake news thrives. Also, when we talk about fake news, there's the assumption that influencers don't share fake news, but that's not true. Fake news would not be popular if we didn't have very, very famous, very, very powerful, very, very strong people amplify them or sometimes even create them. So I think, first of all, is to take responsibility as an individual, as an influencer, to be responsible, to act as though you were a traditional, powerful global media platform, because that's exactly who you are, because you have access to the rest of the world. Apart from the fact that you have millions of followers, you have access to the rest of the world, and anything you do could make anything happen. And then in terms of supporting movements, I think first of all is to understand that all of us are one. We're fighting for the common dignity of people all around the world. So as much as my primary interest is the continent of Africa, I'm very personally interested in ensuring that people's voices are heard in as many places as possible. So in that sense, is to look out for places where people are being oppressed. I know, for instance, there are countries in Africa, for instance, that the internet gets shut down. During elections, the internet gets shut down, governments arrest people. And I personally go out of my way to amplify the voices of their activists and the advocates. Sometimes have physical meetings with respect to Gambia, for instance. We had physical meetings in Dakar. We had physical meetings in other parts of Africa, just with the activists, to make sure that their voices were heard in the elections that they were going to have in the Gambia, and hopefully and thankfully that government went out. There is no limit to how or what you can do as an influencer, but I think there are certain things that must continue to hold true. Number one is to understand that you're just an individual. You don't know everything. You need to seek out for voices that know better than you. Sometimes you need to let other people speak because your voice is very, very heavy and very, very strong. So you must be conscious of that. You must know when to step back and let other people speak. You must know also not just to listen to them, but to also amplify their voices. And you must be conscious of the fact that there are other people that are either battling what you're battling now or what you've battled before. Share your opinions, share your ideas, and support them as much as you can. And I think when you put all of that together, we can begin to have a conversation about the fact that people's voices are actually being heard, and truly the spaces are actually democratized.
Perhaps I could ask Hussein, have you got anything to add to that point?
Well, actually, I think it's amazing that the two guests, Masih and JJ, who are influencers, large followers, are very much talking about the importance of empowering others, particularly people who would bring positive messages to the discussion, because I think that's the major role that influencers can play, which is to make sure that voices of people are actually heard, and because they simply don't have, a lot of people simply don't have any way to get their voice through to governments directly, or to through the media, or through traditional ways. And actually in doing so, they might endanger themselves. So influencers who are willing to take the risk or are able to amplify the voices of others and helping expand the dialogue to be more diverse is a very important step. I think the other issue is also ensuring diversity. So it's important to also make sure that the voices of groups that has been marginalized traditionally, again, by the media or influencers from like generations before are also included in the conversation. I think this is an important role that influencers can do, and then also in relation to security, which is ensuring that when they are amplifying the voice of people, they are very much aware of the issue of consent, and also that they would not endanger people in doing so, because unfortunately one thing that we do is that some people would in amplifying voices of others, they might endanger them in some cases just because they want to advance their own accounts or so on. But I think that having or making sure that you're not endangering the people that you want to help or empower is a very important issue.
And of course, once individuals online have gained some kind of online prominence, it's very likely that other outside groups might try and benefit from that influence. That might mean businesses and brands, or it could even mean governments in some cases. So again, a question for JJ, is it possible to maintain some kind of transparency so that online followers are always aware of who is influencing the influencer?
It's possible, but I think also it comes true in your content. When people see your content, they can tell that, because people are, the fact that they're following you and they are your followers doesn't mean that they don't have the capacity to think for themselves. I also think that's where it might be important for, I know for some systems, for instance, people have to put sponsored content or add to their Instagram or Twitter posts. But other than that, I think people can see through the fact that this particular post has been sponsored by this media company or this government agency or just this brand. So I think it's possible.
And perhaps looking to the future now, JJ, I'm really interested to know what you think might be next for influencers. Will they always be confined to a Twitter profile or a TikTok account, or will their influence at some point spill over even more into the so-called real world?
I think you just nailed it with the last one. I think influencers will spill into the real world, as we currently have people from the from the offline space come on social media and immediately have an immediate following. I think influencers will transfer and translate their influence beyond digital platforms to, interpersonal influencing. So when they appear at physical events, they're easily recognized. They are able to be represented in billboards for the ones that are into fashion and other related contents like that. So I think that's definitely the next step, because we can already see some of that happening. But I think that would happen on a larger scale as the digital space, as social media and the internet generally continue to pervade everywhere, as representation online continues to increase, as penetration and broadband continues to penetrate even the rural areas. I think more people with big voices will continue to have their influences translated from digital and virtual spaces to physical spaces.
OK, and let's bring it back to the present day again. Hussein, we've been talking a lot about positive online campaigns, people who've been advocating for the advancement of human rights, for example. But of course, people fighting against those causes have just as much access to digital tools. So have you seen examples in your work where influencers have been using their platform in a bad way for a negative cause?
Yeah, of course. I mean, this is something very common, not in Egypt, but globally, really. But a lot of the, again, reactionary elements in societies or far right wings have been using social media to promote messages of hate, messages of, exclusion. Talking about Egypt, for example, I mean, there is a very famous preacher, Egypt, for example, that have been one of the proponents, de facto really proponent of sexual assault or forgiving people who have committed sexual assault. And we see lots of people with a large number of followers in Egypt who have been pushing messages that are very much anti-women, anti-LGBTI rights, messages calling for executions, messages, like in further politicizing, further polarizing Egypt and calling for hatred against refugees, migrants, all of that. So yeah, it is being used for bad as well by a large number of people. Governments, of course, are responsible for quite a lot of that. So talking about scripted media content, we have seen how Egypt authorities, for example, they have been trying to to create their own messages through, like police would send scripted messages to, influencers, telling them to share them in order to counter narratives or to join the conversation. I mean, as JJ said, people are not stupid. People usually are able to catch that. So really, when it comes to the danger of social media being used for wars, it's really the danger is usually with those outsiders on the right wing or in the far rise that we have been seeing. And then there is also a criticism that we have been seeing from traditional progressive circles or progressive circles that have gained more momentum. For example, the civil society. We have seen elements within civil societies that have been criticizing the recent movement of against sexual harassment, not for its content, but partially because of methods. And one of the criticisms that they have levied against that was that because it's faceless, it kind of undermines traditional understanding of how you would gain credibility and so on. But I don't think that this is an issue that's bad or good. I think it's just a reaction from civil society or traditional civil society to something that's pretty new, something that's made primarily by people in their 20s. So it's just an interesting development that's happening.
And I guess, Masih, you must have come across that yourself. You must have come across a lot of people online who are fighting for the opposite side. How do you deal with that? Do you engage with them, or what's the best way to deal with it?
You don't know how much frustrating is when you see that a night that a protester is going to be executed, the same night that you want the whole media talk about it, you see that one of the social media influencer published a fake story in saying that a well-known actor in Iran had a surgery and just tonight he changed his sexuality. Now Mohammad Reza Frutan is a woman. And suddenly I see that all my followers going after that fake news and talking about it. I'm saying, like, wait a minute. They're going to execute Navid Afkari, and this is a fake news to change the atmosphere, to change the news. And that happened to us a lot. So this is the regime actually using some of the social media influencers. They give money to them or threaten them and make them like a mouthpiece of the regime to change their narrative. And it breaks my heart. It's not only that. For instance, there are some well-known actresses and celebrities inside Iran, while the whole world got united to save the life of Navid Afkari, Iranian wrestler, who was going to be executed. Suddenly, 2 or 3 well-known social media influencers, the well-known actress, published a story and saying that Navid was a killer. He must be executed. And then you don't know what to do. You just know that this is the dangers of social media and having some like fake social media influencers, or having a regime using the celebrities on social media to change the narrative. And that's a lot happening to us. And sometimes we don't know what to do. For instance, when there is a huge news about crackdown in Iran last November, the government killed 1,500 people. So we are talking about it. And then we see some social media influencers trying to normalize this killing by publishing a video of like women dancing or some beautiful, and attractive photos of some women taking off their hijab and walking in the street, but without protesting against forced hijab. But to show that, you see, this is a normal Iran, getting the attention of the rest of the world from the mass crackdown in Iran. That happens to us a lot. And this is actually the dangerous side of having some fake social media influencers. Well, I get engaged with them. I talk about them. And other people, we have other journalists and we have other activists online. They are really good at it. They try to do a really valuable investigation on them and give them facts to other people and create a huge debate and saying that focus. We have to focus on this execution case. We have to focus on those women who got arrested right now. We have to focus on this human rights issue. Those fake news should be just forgotten. Don't get engaged with them. But we just make an instruction and educate other people to just get a stick with their cause. Otherwise, we get lost. Especially social media are filtered in Iran, but we have our leaders, the leaders of the Islamic Republic, presence on social media, sharing those fake celebrities or fake actors to change the narrative. Last example, one of the girl in Iran set herself on fire and killed herself because she was banned from entering a stadium. She dressed like a boy and then she got arrested. So she got fed up. So she set herself on fire and she killed herself. Suddenly, we saw the fake news. All the social media influencers sharing a fake news and saying that now women are allowed to enter a stadium. It was only one event. But when the social media influencers, when those celebrities changing the narrative and actually making a fake news, we see that CNN, New York Times, Guardian, even Fox News, Washington Post, all following them and saying that women are allowed to enter a stadium, which is a fake news and being spread by fake social media influencers.
Absolutely. So we've got the both sides, and you have to absolutely try and find out where the news is coming from in order to know quite how much you can trust it. We've actually got one more question from our audience that's come in. It's from Grace from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And this is a question for Hussein. How quick is Amnesty International with its research when new social networks get hyped? So how do you measure the relevance of platforms for democracy?
So this is actually an interesting question because it is precisely for the reasons about the emergence of fake news and how much authorities or groups would like to distort reality or distort what's happening or pull attention from real issues as very common. Where this is actually difficult. So the first thing is that you need to identify whether the story is actually correct or no, and this is where the importance of being able to verify that information through contacts on the ground. At the end of the day, you cannot really rely solely on news coming up from Twitter accounts, because we also have been seeing the use of bots or Twitter armies or troll armies that would share stories very widely. But then it's important to take the time to actually verify whether the information that's coming up, even if it's being retweeted or shared by the most prolific influencers, to actually be able to conduct a thorough investigation of what's being told. So if it's a story about torture, it's a story about killing, you need to be able to verify independently what is happening through more traditional methods, so through verification of the videos if it's a video, verification of the authenticity of the photo if it's a photo, conducting interviews with people, but also importantly to get consent about raising issues and so on. So the speed is, while it is a factor at the end of the day for many human rights organizations, the main factor is credibility, and the main factor is making sure that first you would not harm anyone from the victims at all by sharing that information, and that the information that you are commenting on is based on credible research that you can back up, because otherwise you might end up again endangering people and then losing credibility if your only concern is speed only.
Well, sadly, that's all we've actually got time for today. I'd like to say thank you very much to all of our panellists for taking part in this really interesting discussion on influencers and democracy. And of course, thank you very much to our audience for all of your questions and comments. Please do join us again for the next Global Media Forum digital session, which will be on October the 5th, and we'll be looking at the issues of media information literacy in a session that is jointly organised by the Deutsche Welle Academy. I'm Rachel Stewart. Thank you very much for joining in.